Welcome to the Office of Global Engagement's presentation on OPT STEM Extension. Throughout your application process, you're going to be working with our team, with the Office of Global Engagement, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Welcome to the Office of Global Engagement's STEM Extension. This presentation is going to go over the F1 Optional Practical Training 24-month extension. But in order to request that extension, you're going to work with your primary immigration advisor and utilize our International Students and Scholars portal. Throughout this presentation, we're going to talk about how you're going to maintain your immigration status, so you maintain that STEM extension, but also the important timelines and deadlines when you're actually applying for that benefit. First and foremost, you need to remember that maintaining your status is your responsibility as you are the F1 student. Your reporting and your timeliness is going to impact you and you alone. So make sure that you're submitting the documents needed in a timely manner and that you're reporting any updates to our office and working with your primary advisor. The 24-month extension overview is, essentially what you're going to be doing is you're going to upload important documents to our International Students and Scholars portal located at iSSS.usu.edu. Your primary immigration advisor is going to provide you a new I-20 that shows the STEM extension as requested on the back side of your I-20. And then you're going to mail in a copy of both the I-20 and all of the other documents that we're going to discuss later in this presentation. What is STEM OPT extension? Well, that STEM OPT extension is the ability to apply for an additional 24 months if you meet the following requirements. You have to be in a STEM approved major, you have to have a STEM CIP code on your I-20, you have had to work the previous 12 months in standard OPT working for an employer that is both paid as well as more than full-time or more than part-time. And that job must be related to your field of study. So when you're requesting that additional 24-month benefit, you can keep in mind that that is available to you at each academic level. So if you've done your bachelor's and you've applied for that OPT post-degree benefit, and then you've done your extension, you're available to apply for that again if you've done an additional degree. And that's what's great if you're in a STEM major, is that you'll have that benefit multiple times if you've done multiple degrees while you're here in the US. The STEM extension of eligibility is really important because if you don't have those items that are key in place, you're not going to be able to request that extension. One important resource that we always are pointing students to is Study in the States. Study in the States has a lot of resources on their website, including information about how you can apply, what are the employer's responsibilities. You're going to find information on CIP codes. So I do recommend that you explore this website as needed when you're looking at your STEM extension. Now, when we talk about eligibility, the most important things to realize is that you must complete that degree. So if you defended, say, your master's degree, but then didn't finish the appropriate steps to make sure that you receive that degree, you're not going to be eligible to apply for that STEM extension because you do have to provide either a transcript showing that degree or you have to provide the diploma itself. In addition, you have to be working with an employer who is what we call E-Verify. This means that the employer has signed up to obtain an E-Verify number, and that means that they go through a series of steps when they're verifying an employer, an employee, that they're eligible to work for them. And so this is a government mandated piece of the STEM OPT extension. If you have a job with an employer who is not using E-Verify, you're not going to be able to apply for that STEM extension. That E-Verify number shows up on your I-983 form, and without it, you're not eligible. In addition, you're able to apply for your STEM OPT during that 90-day period prior to the end of your EAD card. So you want to make sure that you apply as early as you can, because once you hit that 60-day grace period, the end date on your EAD card, you are no longer eligible to apply for that STEM extension. So after you've completed that degree and you've verified that your CIP code meets the STEM requirements to be a STEM major, again, that resource is located on the Study in the States website. You want to make sure that you haven't exceeded also 90 days of unemployment. Throughout that 12-month period, you are given an unemployment period that is an aggregate. So many students, if they haven't found a job at the beginning of their work authorization and they haven't reported work, they'll start to use that unemployment period. If you've exhausted that 90 days, you are also ineligible for that STEM extension. When you're looking at, say you received a master's degree from another institution and you didn't utilize that OPT benefit, that is something that you can apply for. You'll want to talk to your primary immigration advisor on the steps for that, or visit Study in the States. So when we talk about other eligibility things, we talk about what are the employer requirements. In addition to the E-Verify, that employer that you're working with has to be willing to complete what's called a Form I-983. And on that, they have to provide their EIN number. So if your employer is unwilling to work with you to complete this Form I-983, which is essentially a training plan, or provide you that, your I-983 form is incomplete. When we look at the I-983 form, again, it's located on the Study in the States website. And there's more information about when we go to the Study in the States website, there's more information about how to fill out that Form I-983 and the requirements. When you're filling out the Form I-983, it's important to note that when your employer signs this, they're agreeing to the terms of the government requirements of monitoring you as their employee. So we'll talk about that a little bit further, but let's look at this form. So the training plan, it's a pretty standard form. You're going to be providing some basic information on this form. You're going to certify, your employer is going to certify that everything's correct, but there is some additional information that they have to provide. Now remember, I mentioned that you have to be working for an employer and it needs to be paid. In order to be eligible for that STEM extension, you have to be working a minimum of 20 hours and it has to be paid in order for you to apply for that. And then when we look at this form, again, there's information about how you're going to develop that training plan. So I always tell students to talk to their employers early so they know kind of what this looks like and what's coming, so they can think about how does what you're doing relate to the STEM major, and how are they going to monitor the work that you're doing while you're employed for them. When we get to the last pages of this, when you apply for STEM extension, you're agreeing that you're going to be filing this form on a regular basis, because you basically come up with this training plan, and then when you get to the 1 year, you're providing an evaluation, and then when you get to the 24 months, you're providing a final evaluation. The government wants to make sure that this experience is going to be worthwhile and that they have documentation that shows that that it was beneficial. Or if it wasn't, why wasn't it? So that evaluation is an important piece to make sure that you're completing your requirements for requesting the STEM OPT extension. When we look at the other requirements, we've talked a little bit about the Form I-983, and we've talked a little bit about the employer obligations of filling out that Form I-983, but you do also have to note that that employer could have a site visit. And so it's important that your employer understands the importance of making sure that they have what's called a bona fide relationship with you, that it's not just in title, that it's that you're meeting physical presence, that you're actually reporting to work, and you're actually working for that company. We'll talk about some other variations in some future slides. So you want to make sure ultimately that you're applying before your OPT expires, because you don't want to lose that option to have that future benefit. Unlike your standard OPT, during your first 12-month OPT, you're eligible to apply during that grace semester. That is not the case with your STEM extension. Now, while you're on OPT, you always hear from us that you don't want to let any of your documents expire. Your I-20 is going to have an end date that's in the past on the front, but your OPT is going to be authorized for a future date on the back. But in addition to your I-20, you want to make sure that your passport is still valid. Again, anytime you're here in the US, you have to have proper documentation that you're here legally. So even though you're no longer reporting to our office, you want to make sure that that document's valid, and that's going to be one of the items that we check when you apply for your STEM extension. Now on your I-20, I mentioned that nothing's going to change on the front. Your program's going to end. But again, that CIP code's very important. So if you haven't looked at it in a while, make sure that you understand if you're in a STEM eligible field. And that's going to be the major one on the front of your I-20 under the program of study. Now, when we look at types of allowable employment, we get asked quite frequently, what can I do? Can I volunteer during my STEM extension? Now you have to realize during your 12 months, you were able to work part-time or full-time, paid or unpaid. But remember, you have to have a paid position of more than 20 hours to start that process 90 days before the end of your standard OPT extension. So if you're gonna apply, make sure that you're working with an employer that is paying you and that you're working more than part-time. If not, again, that opportunity to apply is gone. And again, when you get that first job, always ask about the E-Verify number and get their tax identification number, the EIN number. Again, those are the things that you're going to have to include on the forms that you apply with USCIS. Now, there's a couple interesting areas that are important to note, that when you're applying for the STEM extension, that you cannot be trained by another F1 student who's on a STEM OPT extension. So you want to make sure that you're working for someone who is eligible to actually be your supervisor and fill out these forms. Now, the person and the organization that's signing this Form I-983 has to be the company that's providing that practical training experience. So, we get a lot of questions on, who can I work for? Can I be self-employed? Now, these are where it's important to note that you can't be working for someone else who's on a STEM OPT extension. And they have to be willing to complete that Form I-983 and see it through the duration of that 24 months. Now, when we're looking at, like who's hiring you, if the important thing to note is whoever is hiring you, it has to be directly retained to provide those services. So you have to be, whoever's working for, they may not be employees or contractors of the employee's clients. So if you're working for a company that hires, has clients underneath them, you have to be working directly with the company. So a good example of that is, say you are a graphic designer, you need to be working for a company that has clients, but you can't be working for that client and receiving a paycheck. You have to be working and reporting for that I-983. So it can be really challenging if your field is strictly contract work, because who again are you employed for and who's going to be completing that I-983 form? So DHS has the right to look at your I-983 form and determine if you have a bona fide relationship. And so making sure that you have a solid training plan that clearly states who, what, when, where you're going to be working for. And if you have questions, definitely ask. We do get questions about temp staff agencies or third party. And so the things to point out is that you have to be working for the entity that provides that practical training. And it needs to take place at a site. If it does take place at a site other than the employee's principal place of business, that's okay, as long as, again, you have that bona fide relationship. And I think that most of these conditions are going to be just establishing that this is a true and real employer relationship, and that someone's not trying to sign a form, but then they're not monitoring the work. And I think that's kind of the takeaway is if they are signing the form, they should be the person who's supervising the work and can attest to what your day-to-day work routine is and what that this is truly applicable in STEM, and be willing to fill out anything for you in a timely manner. The agency, a third-party agency, cannot complete that training plan form. And so again, if your employer who you're working for is not willing to do that, that's where the third party becomes in question. When we look at when to apply, again, we've talked about how it can be as early as that 90 days before the end of your standard OPT. You want to make sure that you're getting all of your paperwork in before the end of that EAD card. And I always say at least 2 weeks. But I would not wait that long, because I have had students who've said, I'm going to wait, I'm going to get this in, I still have 2 weeks. And if they get it rejected for some reason, they've missed the window to submit that in a timely manner. So I always say, hey, once you hit that 90 days, if you're working for an employer who will sign that paperwork for you, get it sent in. Now, again, just because you thought you might know the date on your EAD card, check that EAD card, because again, that's going to drive your timeline to complete this paperwork. And do take into account that just because you've submitted everything to our office, we might take 5 days to process and get you that new I-20 depending on our workflow. So applying early allows you to not only make sure it's received by USCIS in time, it allows you to get time to actually obtain that I-20. And then the earlier you get it in, the more likely it'll be processed in a timely manner by USCIS. USCIS still allows for 90 to 120 days. And you'll still be kind of doing the same process you did on your standard OPT. You can monitor that case status update on their website. But I get questions all the time. I've submitted my paperwork, it's been 100 days, and I still haven't seen anything. Until you've reached that 120 days, there's no way for you to expedite that request, because in USCIS's mind, it is still right on time. And so until you're past the 120 days, that's when you can follow up to find out what's the status of them processing your request. And typically at that juncture, if it hasn't already gone through the hoops, it will get expedited, because again, they try to hold it to that 120 days. Now, students who are applying for an H-1B often ask, should I apply for my STEM extension? And we always say yes, because anything can happen during that H-1B process. You might not be selected, something could, happen in the end. And so what we generally say is include that paperwork in with your STEM extension packet if you know that you've applied for it. What ends up happening is after you have been selected for the H-1B, a notation will show up in CVIS that shows that you've been selected for that H-1 and that you will have an active CAP gap. When we talk about CAP gap is, say your STEM extension 24-month is going to expire on October 1st. So on October 1st is actually when the CAP gap takes place, and so you're completely fine. But if your STEM OPT were to say end on August 1st, the CAP gap allows you to continue to work between August 1st and October 1st legally when that H-1B takes effect on October 1st. Now, say you've applied for after your standard OPT. you're worried that you applied maybe on the 60th day and we're past the EAD card. When you're going from standard to that STEM extension, as long as they have received it and they've processed it and provided you a receipt, you will be able to continue to work up to 180 days after that card, because they don't restrict you from working while they're processing that STEM extension card. But that is only if you apply before the end of your 90-day period. So again, that's vastly important. Similar to your standard OPT, it's still processed by the U.S. Customs and Immigration Services. That fee that you're going to pay is non-refundable. And it's always important for you to actually visit USCIS's website. So when you go through our portal, we're going to link you to their page, because fees change and they're constantly changing. There are going to be new forms and we are seeing regular increases in those forms. So if you visit the USCIS.gov I-765 form page, you will find current requirements and the current forms that are available, and again, what fees that you're going to need to pay. Starting August 2020, you're going to have to start to include the biometrics fee in with your application. And then we're going to send you that new I-20. That new I-20, again, has your requested OPT on the backside. When you get that new I-20, you're going to make sure that you go through everything, review your application. And again, like we said, if you're on top of things, you're applying 90 days before the end of that standard 12-month OPT. You're going to complete Form I-983 with your employer. You're going to submit this request into the ISSS portal so we can process your new I-20. Once you receive that I-20, you want to make sure that you look it over and make sure everything is accurate. You want to make sure that you sign it. Again, allow for 5 business days to get that new I-20. And then you're going to collect all your other application materials, and we want to make sure that they're getting mailed in a timely manner. Once you receive that employment authorization document, you're going to be providing to that as you go, because since you're applying for that STEM extension, you're still sponsored by Utah State University. You're going to be reporting into our office every 6 months. And so on the 6 months, you're going to be uploading a copy of that EAD. And if nothing's changed on your Form I-983, the copy of that. Once we get to the 1 year, you're going to complete that 1 year evaluation, and you're going to upload that with your original I-983. So you want to hang on to a copy of that. And then again, at 18 months, you're going to check in with our office and upload those documents. And again, at the 24 month. If anything changes throughout that period, you're still going to have to upload a new I-983. So say your pay changes, or your title, or your supervisor, or even you get a whole new job. Any of those changes would warrant that you have to complete a new I-983. That I-983 should reflect your current situation with your employer. And if it changes, we need a new copy. So that's part of what you're going to be doing to maintain your F1 status while you're on that STEM extension. So there was reporting requirements. I just mentioned your address, phone, email, employment, again, within 10 days. So if you've moved, you should be updating that. And how you update those things, because we use this International Students and Scholars portal, and it feeds from your Banner account, you're going to be updating your biographical information, your address and your phone, in your MyUSU account. So it may have been a minute since you've logged into that because you graduated, you haven't bothered to look at it. You might have to reset your username or password by visiting myid.usu.edu. If you have to do that, it's basically usually a password reset that will allow you to get into the International Students and Scholars portal. And again, you'll be doing that report, update, STEM, employment in our system. And again, for that 6, 12, 18, and 24 months. And anytime there's a change. So while you're on that OPT, that STEM extension, because of those reporting requirements, your travel signature is only valid every 6 months. And that's because you're required to check in with our office. So I do have students who will often say, I've just done my reporting. Can you provide me a new travel signature? I'll pay for the shipment. And so, you never know what's going to happen. You never know when you're going to need to travel. At those reporting requirements, that's a great time to get a travel signature and have a copy of your I-20 sent to you that's valid. Again, failure to provide these updates on the 6, 12, 18, and 24 months may result in the termination of your I-20. One of the ways that you can make sure that you're meeting all those employment requirements is to create an account on the portal. SEVIS has a portal account, so it's different from the ISSS portal, but they will also send you reminders of any reporting requirements if you have created that account. Now the I-983 form, we looked at that earlier. Again, it's a multiple page document. You don't have to fill out any of the evaluation information when you're submitting that upon your original request, but you want to make sure that it's filled out entirely and that it is signed, and it's signed by your employers as well as you. After you've completed that portal request, you're going to get that new I-20, and you're going to sign that I-20, make a copy, and include it with your other documentations. So whenever you're logging into this portal, it's important that you have a copy of that signed I-983 form, because again, if it's incomplete, we're not going to be able to process your request for that new I-20. And it's important that you have a copy of your employment offer letter and your previous EAD. So before you log into our portal, make sure that you have those 3 documents, especially the I-983, because it does take some time for you to get that routed through the appropriate employer contacts. If you have questions, you can make an appointment with our peer advisor. Questions about the form, questions about what you need to be submitting. If you have questions that are more immigration related, definitely make an appointment with your immigration advisor. I know sometimes students have concerns when it comes to maybe change of status and other things. We're happy to meet with you, and those appointments can be made on our Global Engagement website. So the new I-20, if you have any errors, it's very common that the things that will get your STEM OPT request packet returned are failure to sign that new I-20, failure to sign that I-765 form. So you want to make sure that they are completed. That is something that USCIS, when they're scanning them in, they're looking for signatures. So once you reviewed that I-20, you're going to prepare all of the materials into a packet to be mailed to USCIS. Very similar to your standard OPT request. You're including passport photos taken within the last 30 days. You're including your fees, that USCIS I-765 fee, any biometric fees. And if you're writing a check or paying it with a money order, make sure that it's payable to U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and that you're including your SEVIS ID in the memo line. The G1145 is to confirm that they've received, the G1145 allows USCIS to notify you by email or by text updates regarding your I-765 application. So you'll get a confirmation that says it's been received with a receipt number. If you don't fill out the G1145, everything is going to be mailed to the address that you included in your I-765 form. I recommend filling out the G1145 because it helps you get more timely updates, even though it is strange to get texts from USCIS. So you're going to fill out that form on the USCIS website. Make sure that you're using the most recent form. Read any of their notes at the top, any requirements that are going to be changing the next period of time. And then you're going to make copies of your current I-20 that you were just issued. You're going to sign it. You're going to provide your previous OPT I-20s or STEM OPT I-20s. And you're going to provide a copy of your EAD card, both the front and the back. Some students will include that form I-797. It's not going to hurt for you to include that in that application. In addition, you're going to include a copy of your passport, your biographical page, your F1 visa stamp, if applicable. You're going to include your expired passport as well. If for some reason your I-94 is not connected to your current passport, you may have entered the country on a previous passport, so you're going to include that to go along with your I-94. That electronic I-94 should be retrievable from the I-94 website. Again, we have links in our portal. And again, including your travel history is not going to hurt as well. You're going to be answering questions on the I-765 and pulling from these pages. And so this is just the evidence that supports how you filled out the I-765. Now again, that proof of the final STEM degree, making sure that either you're providing a transcript that shows the notation of your degree or your diploma. Again, they want to see that you've completed that degree and have fulfilled the requirements that make you eligible for that STEM extension. If it is a STEM extension you're requesting based on a prior degree, you're going to want to include that information as well as make sure that your primary advisor is aware of that situation. And again, additional documents you might include might be anything regarding an H-1B filing. The passport requirements, standard passport photos are required, again, within 30 days. I've had students who've submitted photos that they've had from their original passport. I have seen an I-765 application be denied because the photo that they provided was the same as the passport photo. So do not send old photos. They want to make sure that it looks like you here and now. And at the back of that photo, you know, write on the back, your I-94 number, make sure it's clear that they can read it. Again, this is so, for some reason, the photos get lost from your application, they can connect them back to you. But you want to make sure that anything that you're writing on the back of that photo, it's light and soft. We don't want to scratch the photos. The USCIS payment, it's most common for students to pay with a money order. I recommend a money order just because you're not providing your credit card information and putting that in the mail. You want to make sure that it's filled out completely, again, noting either your I-94 or your SEVIS number on the check. Again, that's so they can connect it back to you. If you do pay with a personal check, make sure that it has your contact information printed on it. So you don't want to use starter checks when you create a new account. You want to make sure that it's printed, it has contact information for you, and include a phone number. And you want to make sure you have money in your account. So again, the reason why a money order is nice is that they're not going to return your application because of insufficient funds. If you do choose to pay with a credit card, the G1450 will be destroyed after they receive it and they process your payment. However, again, I typically recommend the money order just so you're not mailing your credit card information and putting it out there. The G1145, again, we mentioned that that was optional. Again, you're providing your cell phone number for you to receive text messages and as well as your email. If you do not include this, like I said, you'll have that information mailed to the address provided in your I-765 form. When we look at the I-765 form, some of the most common mistakes that I see when processing a STEM OPT extension is that students will fail to mark the renewal of my permission to accept employment 1.c on the first page. You will also see that they've maybe filled it out in blue ink or something's ineligible. So make sure that when you fill out the I-765 form that it's legible, that it's in black ink or it's typed up on a computer, that you're signing in black ink. Remember that there are no digital signatures allowed on this form. You should print everything single-sided and complete every single page. If it's something that's not applicable to you, you should write NA in the fields that are not applicable and make sure that you're marking all of the appropriate boxes. Again, you don't want to have your application rejected because they thought maybe you missed something when really it wasn't applicable. So review all of your paperwork, make sure it's printed one-sided, get it all ready, put it in order. We recommend putting your government forms on top. And then you're going to send that certified mail. And after you send it certified mail, they're going to send you a receipt that's going to take about 2 weeks. Again, if you've signed that G1145, it should be pretty quick that you're getting a text message or an email, usually within that first week after it's received. And again, that employment authorization document can take up to 120 days, but if you've filed prior to the end of your standard 12-month OPT, you're going to be okay to continue that work while you're waiting for them to process that card up to 180 days. If you haven't received your card before that period, you'll want to follow up with USCIS to make sure that there's not an issue with your application, or if you've moved, that they've sent some kind of rejection and you just didn't see it. So just because you don't get that EAD card in the 120 days, still proactive, monitor your case status on the USCIS website and make sure that you've signed up for any possible alerts. Once you get that EAD card, they will send you an email probably a week or two after you get the EAD card about creating an account on the SEVIS portal. If you would like more information about creating an account on the SEVIS portal, you can check out our ISSS tutorials in our system. There you will find information about the portal account, as well as other information regarding forms. And then again, if you have questions, you can always make appointments. We want to thank you for joining us today. And again, we'll see you as needed. Make an appointment with our team. We're happy and willing to help you with any questions that you have. We are busy sometimes, so do take advantage of making an appointment with our peer advisor or contacting our front desk if you need direction on where to go. Again, thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
Woohoo! That was great.
I feel like I talk forever. I'm like, are we done?